In the lush green expanse of Ibirapura Park, São Paulo's urban oasis, an extraordinary encounter was about to unfold, one that would shatter the foundations of Dr. Carlos Silveira's meticulously constructed life. The renowned cardiac surgeon, known for his steady hands and unwavering composure in the operating theater, found himself suddenly adrift in a sea of uncertainty as he locked eyes with a man who could have been his mirror image. Eduardo Mendez, a stranger with an uncannily familiar face, approached Dr. Silveira with a mixture of trepidation and excitement, his words cutting through the ambient sounds of the park like a scalpel through flesh. "Dr. Silveira?" Eduardo called out, his voice trembling slightly. "My name is Eduardo Mendez. I believe we have much to discuss." Carlos, momentarily stunned into silence, could only manage a whispered response. "How is this possible?" "It's like looking into a mirror." The two men stood facing each other, identical down to the flecks of gray in their neatly trimmed beards and the creases around their eyes that spoke of both laughter and hardship. As parkgoers strolled by, oblivious to the life-altering reunion taking place in their midst, Carlos and Eduardo began to piece together the puzzle of their shared history. They learned that they were identical twins, separated at birth 50 years ago under circumstances shrouded in mystery and secrecy. Carlos, raised by a prominent São Paulo family, had pursued a career in medicine, driven by an inexplicable desire to mend broken hearts. Eduardo, adopted by a working-class couple in the countryside, had become a high school biology teacher, his passion for life sciences perhaps a distant echo of his brother's calling. As they walked along the winding paths of Ibirapura Park, their conversation flowed as naturally as if they had known each other all their lives. They discovered shared mannerisms, similar tastes in music, and even the same allergy to shellfish. Yet, beneath the surface of their growing connection, an undercurrent of complex emotions threatened to pull them under. Carlos, grappling with the shock of this revelation, found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about his identity. He had always felt a vague sense of incompleteness, a void he had attempted to fill with professional achievements and accolades. Now, looking at Eduardo, he realized that the missing piece of his life puzzle had been walking around in the world all along, teaching teenagers about cell division and the miracles of the human body. Eduardo, for his part, had always known he was adopted but had never pursued his biological origins out of respect for his adoptive parents. He had stumbled upon the truth almost by accident, overhearing a conversation at a family gathering that led him down a rabbit hole of birth records and DNA tests. When he finally tracked down Carlos, he had spent weeks gathering the courage to make contact. Now, as they sat on a bench overlooking the serene waters of the park's lake, Eduardo felt a mix of relief and anxiety. Would this brilliant surgeon, this man who shared his DNA but not his life experiences, accept him as a brother? As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the park, Carlos and Eduardo delved deeper into their respective lives. Carlos spoke of the pressures of his high-stakes career, the lives he had saved, and the ones he couldn't. He confessed to the loneliness that often plagued him, despite his professional success and social status. Eduardo shared stories of his own journey, the joy he found in nurturing young minds, and the family he had built with his wife of 25 years. He spoke of his two children, now in college, and Carlos marveled at the idea of suddenly becoming an uncle. The two men laughed as they recounted childhood mishaps and teenage rebellions, marveling at the parallel paths their lives had taken despite the vast differences in their upbringings. As they talked, they began to notice the subtle differences that set them apart, The way Carlos gestured with surgical precision while Eduardo's movements were more relaxed and expansive, the slight variations in their accents that hinted at their different backgrounds. These small distinctions only served to highlight the miracle of their connection. As the day waned and the park began to empty, Carlos and Eduardo found themselves reluctant to part ways. They exchanged phone numbers and made plans to meet again, this time with their families. The prospect of integrating their separate lives was both exhilarating and daunting. How would Carlos's socialite friends react to his newfound working-class brother? How would Eduardo's children feel about suddenly gaining a famous uncle and a whole new branch of their family tree? As they stood to leave, Carlos impulsively pulled Eduardo into a tight embrace. In that moment, 50 years of separation melted away, and they were simply brothers, reunited at last. Tears welled up in both men's eyes as they held on to each other, making up for lost time. When they finally pulled apart, both Carlos and Eduardo felt a shift in their world, a sense of wholeness they had never known they were missing. As they walked towards the park exit, their steps fell naturally in sync. They made plans for dinner the following week, eager to continue unraveling the mystery of their separation and to begin building a shared future. Carlos, usually so focused on his next surgery or medical conference, found himself looking forward to something entirely different, getting to know the brother he never knew he had. Eduardo, typically absorbed in lesson plans and grading papers, was already imagining the fascinating discussions about medicine and biology he and Carlos could share. As they parted ways at the gates of Ibarapura Park, each man felt as though he was leaving with more than he had arrived with. The park, which had been merely a place for Carlos to clear his head between surgeries and for Eduardo to kill time before heading home, had become the backdrop for the most important encounter of their lives. The brothers walked to their respective cars, turning back several times to wave, as if afraid the other might disappear if they lost sight of each other. As the Sao Paulo traffic engulfed them, carrying them back to their separate lives, both Carlos and Eduardo felt a new sense of purpose and belonging. They knew that the road ahead would not be without its challenges. There were many questions left unanswered, and integrating their lives would take time and effort. But they also knew that they had found something precious and rare, a second chance at family, an opportunity to bridge the gap that fate had placed between them 50 years ago. As the sun set over Ibarapura Park, casting a warm glow over the city, two men drove home, their hearts full of hope and their minds buzzing with possibilities. The park stood as a silent witness to this extraordinary reunion, its trees and paths holding the secret of a bond reforged, a connection restored against all odds. And in the gathering dusk, as the first stars appeared in the sky, the promise of a new chapter hung in the air, a story of two lives, once separated, now intertwined in ways they were only beginning to discover. The revelation hit Carlos and Eduardo like a thunderbolt, their newfound brotherhood now intertwined with a web of secrets and unethical practices. As they sat in Carlos's modest apartment, surrounded by old photographs and documents, the gravity of their discovery weighed heavily upon them. The brothers, separated at birth and reunited by chance, found themselves at the center of a storm that had been brewing for decades. Carlos, his hands trembling slightly, picked up a yellowed newspaper clipping from 1968. "It's hard to believe," he murmured, his eyes scanning the article that hinted at widespread adoption irregularities in Brazil. Eduardo leaned in, his brow furrowed with concentration. "We're not just victims of illegal adoption, Carlos," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're subjects in some twisted scientific experiment." The realization that their lives had been manipulated from the very beginning sent a chill down both their spines. They had been pawns in a larger game, their separation orchestrated not just by unscrupulous adoption agencies, but by scientists eager to study the age-old question of nature versus nurture. As the brothers delved deeper into their investigation, they uncovered a trail of documents that led them through a labyrinth of government offices, shady orphanages, and prestigious universities. Each new piece of information they uncovered only served to fuel their determination to expose the truth. They learned of other twins separated and scattered across Brazil, all unwitting participants in this clandestine study. Carlos and Eduardo spent countless nights poring over records, making phone calls, and tracking down leads. Their shared quest brought them closer, bridging the decades they had spent apart. They discovered that their biological parents had been young and impoverished, easy targets for a system that preyed on the vulnerable. The adoption agency had presented itself as a beacon of hope, promising a better life for the twins. Instead, it had torn them apart, selling one brother to a wealthy family in São Paulo while the other was sent to a middle-class home in Rio de Janeiro. As they pieced together their past, Carlos and Eduardo also began to understand the profound impact their separation had had on their lives. Carlos, raised in luxury, had struggled with feelings of emptiness and disconnection despite his material comfort. Eduardo, who had grown up in more modest circumstances, had always felt a nagging sense that something was missing from his life. Now, reunited, they found in each other the missing pieces of their identities. Their investigation led them to Dr. Mariana Silva, a retired psychologist who had been involved in the twin study. At first reluctant to speak, she eventually broke down under the weight of her guilt. "We thought we were doing something important for science," she confessed, her eyes brimming with tears. "We never considered the human cost." Dr. Silva's testimony opened up new avenues of inquiry, leading the brothers to uncover a vast network of complicit doctors, researchers, and government officials. The scope of the scandal was staggering, affecting hundreds of families across Brazil. Carlos and Eduardo realized that their story was just one thread in a much larger tapestry of pain and deception. As they continued their quest for justice, the brothers faced numerous obstacles. Some of those involved in the study had died, while others stubbornly refused to acknowledge their role in the separations. Government officials stonewalled their requests for information, and they encountered resistance from powerful families who feared the exposure of their involvement in the illegal adoptions. Despite these challenges, Carlos and Eduardo pressed on, driven by a desire not just for personal closure, but for justice for all the families torn apart by this unethical experiment. They reached out to journalists, lawyers, and human rights organizations, slowly building a coalition of supporters determined to bring the truth to light. Their story began to gain traction in the media, sparking a national conversation about adoption practices and the ethics of scientific research. Other twins separated by the study started to come forward, their stories eerily similar to Carlos and Eduardo's. A support group formed, providing a space for these long-lost siblings to connect and heal. As public pressure mounted, the government was forced to acknowledge the scandal and launch an official investigation. Carlos and Eduardo found themselves at the center of a movement, their personal quest for answers transforming into a crusade for justice and reform. The brothers testified before congressional committees, sharing their story and advocating for changes in adoption laws and research ethics. Their bond, forged through shared trauma and the fight for truth, grew stronger with each passing day. They discovered in each other not just a biological connection, but a profound friendship and understanding that transcended their years apart. As the investigation progressed, more details of the twin study came to light. The researchers had meticulously documented the lives of the separated twins, comparing their development, personalities, and life outcomes. The data, while scientifically interesting, was tainted by the unethical means by which it had been obtained. Carlos and Eduardo grappled with the knowledge that their every milestone and struggle had been observed and recorded by unseen watchers. The psychological toll of this revelation was immense, but they found strength in their newfound relationship and the support of others who had experienced similar traumas. Their story inspired a renewed examination of other scientific studies conducted during the same period, leading to the uncovering of additional ethical violations in various fields of research. The scandal sparked a global conversation about the limits of scientific inquiry and the importance of informed consent. As the legal proceedings against those responsible for the illegal adoptions and unethical study moved forward, Carlos and Eduardo focused on healing and building a relationship that had been denied to them for so long. They discovered shared interests and quirks that spoke to their genetic connection, but also reveled in their differences, the unique aspects of their personalities shaped by their disparate upbringings. Their journey of discovery and justice had transformed them, opening their eyes to the complexities of identity, family, and ethics. They emerged from the ordeal not just as brothers, but as advocates for change, determined to ensure that no other families would suffer the same fate. As they stood together, facing a future they never could have imagined, Carlos turned to Eduardo and said, "We may have started this journey looking for answers about our past, but what we've found is so much more. We've found each other and a purpose greater than ourselves." Eduardo nodded, a smile playing on his lips. "And we've only just begun," he replied, his voice filled with determination. "There's still so much work to do, so many wrongs to right." Together, the brothers faced the future, their bond a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring power of family, no matter how long denied. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the city, Carlos sat at his desk, his face illuminated by the soft glow of his computer screen. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitating before typing another search query about his past. Unbeknownst to him, in a room down the hall, his daughter Maria was peering through a crack in her bedroom door, her brow furrowed with concern. Maria had always been close to her father, but lately, something felt off. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but the air in their home seemed thick with secrets. Carlos had been spending more time alone, his normally jovial demeanor replaced by a pensive, almost haunted look. It was as if he was carrying a weight that threatened to crush him at any moment. Closing her door quietly, Maria reached for her phone and fired off a quick text to her best friend, Lucas. "Meet me at our spot in 15 minutes. It's about Dad." She didn't wait for a reply before slipping on her sneakers and climbing out her window, a skill she had perfected over years of late-night adventures. As Maria made her way through the quiet streets, her mind raced with possibilities. What could be troubling her father so deeply? Was it work? Financial troubles? Or something more sinister? The uncertainty gnawed at her, fueling her determination to uncover the truth. Across town, in a state-of-the-art laboratory, Dr. Helena Rocha peered into a microscope, her eyes widening with excitement. The geneticist had dedicated her career to unraveling the mysteries of epigenetics, and now, after years of painstaking research, she was on the brink of a breakthrough. Her latest study on identical twins separated at birth had yielded results that could revolutionize our understanding of nature versus nurture. Little did Helena know that her work was about to intersect with a story that had been unfolding for decades. A story of two brothers whose lives had taken dramatically different paths. As she prepared to publish her findings, she remained blissfully unaware of the ripple effect it would have on Carlos, Eduardo, and their families. Back at the park, Maria spotted Lucas waiting for her on their favorite bench. As she approached, she could see the concern etched on his face. "What's going on, Maria?" he asked, his voice low and serious. Maria sank onto the bench beside him, letting out a long sigh. "It's my dad," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "He's been acting strange lately. Secretive. I think something's wrong, and I need your help to figure out what it is." Lucas listened intently as Maria recounted her observations over the past few weeks. The hushed phone conversations, the late nights spent hunched over the computer, the distant look in Carlos's eyes when he thought no one was watching. As the pieces began to fall into place, Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. Whatever was going on, it was clear that this was no ordinary family drama. "Okay," Lucas said, his mind already formulating a plan. "We need to start gathering information. Can you access your dad's computer or phone?" Maria shook her head, a mix of frustration and determination in her eyes. "He's been extra careful lately. But I did overhear him mention something about medical records and a Dr. Rocha. Maybe that's a place to start?" As the two friends began to plot their investigation, they were unaware of the forces already in motion. Miles away, Eduardo was grappling with his own demons, the weight of long-buried secrets threatening to suffocate him. He had always known that the truth would eventually come to light, but he had hoped for more time. Time to prepare, time to make amends. The next morning, as the city slowly came to life, Dr. Helena Rocha arrived at her office earlier than usual. She had barely slept, her mind buzzing with the implications of her research. As she booted up her computer to put the finishing touches on her paper, an email notification caught her attention. The sender's name made her heart skip a beat, Carlos Mendoza. With trembling fingers, Helena opened the email. The message was brief, but its contents sent shockwaves through her body. Carlos was requesting information about a set of twins born at the hospital where she had conducted part of her research, twins who had been separated at birth over 4 decades ago. As she read and reread the email, the pieces began to fall into place. Could it be that her groundbreaking study on epigenetics was somehow connected to this man's personal quest? Meanwhile, Maria and Lucas had begun their own investigation. Armed with nothing but determination and a healthy dose of teenage ingenuity, they set out to uncover the truth behind Carlos's strange behavior. Their first stop was the local library, where they spent hours poring over old newspapers and public records, searching for any clue that might shed light on the mystery. As the day wore on, Maria's phone buzzed with a text from her father. "Working late tonight. Don't wait up." The knot in her stomach tightened. Whatever Carlos was involved in, it was clear that it was consuming him. More determined than ever, Maria redoubled her efforts, her eyes scanning page after page of information. It was Lucas who finally stumbled upon something promising. Hidden in the archives of a local newspaper was a small article from over 40 years ago. The headline read, "Local Hospital Celebrates Rare Birth of Identical Twins." As Maria leaned in to read the article, her breath caught in her throat. The names of the parents listed were unmistakably those of her grandparents. The pieces were starting to come together, but the picture they formed was still blurry. Why would her father be so interested in a birth announcement from before he was born? And how did it connect to his current behavior? As Maria and Lucas left the library, their minds whirling with questions, they failed to notice the man watching them from across the street, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. Eduardo had been trailing the teenagers all day, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what they were about to uncover. He had always known this day would come, but seeing it unfold before his eyes was almost more than he could bear. As he watched Maria and Lucas walk away, deep in conversation, he made a decision. It was time to end the secrecy, to face the truth head-on, no matter the consequences. As night fell once again, the city hummed with the energy of lives intertwining in ways yet unseen. In her lab, Dr. Helena Rocha worked feverishly, her research taking on new meaning in light of Carlos's email. In his home office, Carlos stared at an old photograph, his fingers tracing the faces of two identical baby boys. And in her room, Maria lay awake, her mind racing with the implications of what she and Lucas had discovered. The stage was set for a collision of past and present, of scientific discovery and personal revelation. As the clock ticked steadily towards midnight, none of them could have predicted how their lives would be forever changed by the truths waiting to be uncovered. The story of Carlos and Eduardo, of nature and nurture, of bonds that transcend time and distance, was about to unfold in ways that would challenge everything they thought they knew about family, identity, and the power of genetic destiny. The grand medical conference hall buzzed with anticipation as doctors, researchers, and medical professionals from around the world gathered for the annual symposium on genetic breakthroughs. The air was thick with excitement, and whispers of groundbreaking discoveries echoed through the corridors. At the center of it all stood Dr. Carlos Mendez, a rising star in the field of genetic research, his hands trembling slightly as he shuffled his notes one last time before taking the stage. Carlos had spent years working on his theory of genetic memory transfer, a concept that had been met with skepticism and ridicule by many of his peers. But today, he was determined to prove them all wrong. As he stepped onto the stage, the bright lights momentarily blinded him, and he squinted to make out the faces in the audience. Among them, he spotted his daughter Maria, her encouraging smile providing a brief moment of comfort. Just as Carlos cleared his throat to begin his presentation, the double doors at the back of the hall burst open with a thunderous bang. All heads turned to see Maria, another Maria, rushing down the aisle, her lab coat fluttering behind her like a cape. Confusion rippled through the audience as they looked back and forth between the Maria seated calmly in the front row and the one sprinting towards the stage. "Dad! Stop! You need to know," the second Maria shouted, her voice filled with urgency and desperation. "You were part of an experiment." Carlos froze, his mouth agape, as he watched his daughter, or someone who looked exactly like her, leap onto the stage. The audience murmured in bewilderment, and security guards began to move towards the commotion. But before they could reach her, another voice cut through the chaos. "My God, it's you?" The twins from Case 23. Dr. Helena Santos, a renowned geneticist known for her controversial studies on twin development, stood up from her seat in the front row. Her eyes were wide with a mix of shock and recognition as she stared at Carlos and the man seated next to Maria, Eduardo, Carlos's brother and fellow researcher. The hall fell into an eerie silence as the weight of Dr. Helena's words sank in. Carlos looked at Eduardo, then at both Marias, his mind racing to make sense of the situation. Eduardo rose slowly from his seat, his face a mirror of Carlos's confusion and dawning realization. "What's going on?" Carlos managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. The Maria on stage took a deep breath, her eyes brimming with tears. "Dad, Uncle Eduardo, you've been lied to your entire lives," she began, her voice trembling. "You weren't just twins separated at birth. You were part of a secret experiment conducted by a group of scientists, including Dr. Helena." Dr. Helena, who had made her way to the stage, nodded solemnly. "It's true," she admitted, her voice heavy with regret. "Case 23 was our most ambitious project. We wanted to explore the limits of nature versus nurture, to see how identical twins raised in completely different environments would develop." The audience was captivated, hanging on every word as the drama unfolded before them. Cameras flashed, and reporters scribbled furiously in their notepads, sensing that they were witnessing a moment that would shake the scientific community to its core. Eduardo joined Carlos on the stage, placing a steadying hand on his brother's shoulder. "But how? Why?" he asked, his voice a mix of anger and disbelief. Dr. Helena took a deep breath before continuing. "Your parents were approached before you were born. They were told that one of you had a rare genetic condition that required you to be separated for your own safety. It was a lie, of course, but they believed they were doing what was best for you." The Maria in the audience stood up, her face a mask of confusion and hurt. "But who am I then?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The Maria on stage turned to her doppelganger with a sad smile. "You're me, or rather, we're both Maria. We're twins too, created from the same embryo but implanted into different surrogate mothers. They wanted to see if the children of the original twins would show similar traits despite being raised by different versions of the same parent." A collective gasp rippled through the audience. The implications of this revelation were staggering, not just for Carlos and Eduardo, but for the entire field of genetic research. Questions of ethics, consent, and the very nature of identity swirled through the air like a tempest. Carlos, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally found his voice. "All these years," he began, his words thick with emotion, "all my research, my theories about genetic memory, they were based on my own experiences, weren't they? The inexplicable knowledge, the dreams, the sense of déjà vu." Dr. Helena nodded. "You and Eduardo were our most successful subjects. Despite being raised in different countries with different languages and cultures, you both showed remarkable similarities in your interests, abilities, and even your choice of careers. Your work on genetic memory transfer, Carlos, is groundbreaking precisely because it's rooted in your own unique experience." Eduardo ran a hand through his hair, his mind reeling. "But why come forward now? Why reveal all this after so many years?" The Maria on stage stepped forward. "Because the experiment didn't end with your generation," she explained. "It's still ongoing. There are others out there, more twins, more families torn apart by this twisted pursuit of knowledge. I couldn't stand by and watch it continue." As she spoke, murmurs of shock and outrage began to ripple through the audience. Colleagues who had worked together for years suddenly looked at each other with suspicion, wondering if they too might be unwitting subjects in some grand experiment. Carlos turned to Dr. Helena, his eyes blazing with a mix of anger and determination. "We need to stop this," he declared. "We need to find the others, tell them the truth, and put an end to this unethical manipulation of human lives." Dr. Helena nodded, her shoulders sagging with the weight of her guilt. "You're right," she agreed. It's time to come clean, to face the consequences of our actions. But you should know, the implications of this revelation go far beyond just a few families. The data we've gathered over the years, it could revolutionize our understanding of human development, of the interplay between genetics and environment. Eduardo stepped forward, his face set in a determined expression. Then we'll use that knowledge for good, he declared. We'll find a way to help people to advance science ethically without resorting to deception and manipulation. As the brothers stood side by side, their identical features highlighted by the stage lights, a sense of purpose seemed to settle over them. The audience, still reeling from the revelations, watched in awe as Carlos and Eduardo shook hands, a silent agreement passing between them. The Maria from the audience joined her counterpart on stage, and for a moment, the four of them, two sets of twins, separated by lies but united by blood and a shared desire for truth, stood together, presenting a united front against the unethical practices that had shaped their lives. Carlos turned to address the stunned audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady and resolute, "today's presentation will be a little different than what was originally planned. Instead of discussing theoretical genetic memory transfer, we're going to talk about a real-life experiment that has spanned decades and affected countless lives. It's time for the truth to come to light, no matter how uncomfortable or inconvenient it may be." As Carlos began to recount their story, the audience listened in rapt attention. Reporters furiously took notes, scientists huddled together in heated discussions, and a palpable sense of change filled the air. It was clear that this revelation would send shockwaves through the scientific community, challenging long-held beliefs about research ethics and the limits of human experimentation. In that moment, as the truth unfurled like a banner of revolution, it became clear that the real breakthrough being presented at the conference was not about genetics or memory transfer, but about the indomitable human spirit and its capacity for forgiveness, understanding, and the relentless pursuit of truth. The story of Carlos, Eduardo, and the two Marias would be told and retold, a cautionary tale and a beacon of hope for generations to come. In the bustling heart of Sao Paulo, where the rhythm of life pulses through crowded streets and towering skyscrapers, an extraordinary tale of fate and family was about to unfold. It began on a sun-drenched afternoon in a park teeming with laughter and the sweet scent of blooming jacarandas. Carlos, a distinguished professor of genetics with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes that hinted at a lifetime of curiosity, found himself drawn to a bench near the park's central fountain. As he settled down to enjoy his lunch break, he couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to happen. Little did he know that just a few meters away, Eduardo, a successful businessman with a sharp mind and an even sharper suit, was experiencing a similar premonition. The two men, strangers to each other yet bound by an invisible thread of destiny, were about to embark on a journey that would redefine their understanding of family, identity, and the intricate workings of fate. As Carlos unwrapped his sandwich, a gust of wind caught his napkin, sending it fluttering through the air. In a moment of serendipity, it landed at Eduardo's feet. Their eyes met as Eduardo picked up the wayward napkin, and in that instant, both men felt an inexplicable connection. Polite smiles turned into friendly conversation, and soon they found themselves engrossed in a discussion that ranged from their careers to their shared love of Brazilian literature. As they talked, they couldn't help but notice striking similarities in their mannerisms, their laughter, even the way they gestured while speaking. It was Eduardo who first voiced the thought that had been niggling at the back of both their minds. "You know, it's strange, but I feel like I've known you my whole life." Carlos nodded, a mixture of excitement and trepidation coursing through him. I was thinking the same thing. It's almost as if. He trailed off, not daring to complete the thought. But the seed had been planted, and over the next few weeks, Carlos and Eduardo found themselves meeting regularly, drawn together by an inexplicable force. They shared stories of their childhoods, their families, and their lives, each revelation bringing more questions than answers. It was during one of these meetings that Carlos, driven by his scientific background and growing suspicion, suggested they take a DNA test. The results would change their lives forever. As they sat in Carlos's lab, staring at the undeniable evidence before them, the truth hit them with the force of a tidal wave. They were brothers, identical twins separated at birth. The revelation sent shockwaves through both their lives. Questions flooded their minds. How had this happened? Why were they separated? Who was responsible? The search for answers led them down a rabbit hole of long-buried secrets and painful truths. They discovered a dark chapter in Brazil's history, a time when illegal adoptions were not uncommon, and the pain of separation was masked by the promise of a better life. For Carlos and Eduardo, the journey to uncover their past became a mission to heal not only their own wounds but those of countless other families torn apart by similar circumstances. As they delved deeper into their investigation, they encountered resistance from those who wished to keep the past buried. But their determination, fueled by the newfound strength of their brotherly bond, was unshakable. They reached out to journalists, lawyers, and activists, slowly piecing together the puzzle of their separation. The story of the reunited twins captured the public's imagination, shining a spotlight on an issue that had long been ignored. As media attention grew, so did the pressure on the institutions responsible for the brothers' separation. Carlos and Eduardo found themselves at the center of a national conversation about adoption, identity, and the fundamental right to know one's origins. But amidst the whirlwind of public interest and legal battles, the brothers also faced personal challenges. How would they integrate their new reality into their existing lives? Carlos's wife and children welcomed Eduardo with open arms, but the adjustment wasn't without its difficulties. Eduardo, who had always seen himself as an only child, now had to reconcile his identity with this newfound family connection. Yet, as they navigated these choppy waters, their bond only grew stronger. They discovered shared interests they never knew they had, from a love of classical music to an uncanny ability to finish each other's sentences. They laughed at the years they had spent unknowingly mirroring each other's lives from afar. Carlos's expertise in genetics proved invaluable as they explored the scientific aspects of their twinship. They marveled at the similarities in their DNA, at the way nature had asserted itself despite their years of separation. This scientific curiosity led to collaborations with researchers studying the effects of environment versus genetics, their unique story providing a rare opportunity for twin studies. As the legal proceedings against the institutions responsible for their separation unfolded, Carlos and Eduardo found themselves grappling with complex emotions. There was anger at the system that had robbed them of 50 years together, but also gratitude for the lives they had lived and the families they had built. When the court finally ruled in their favor, awarding them a substantial settlement, they knew immediately what they wanted to do with the money. With the same determination that had driven their search for the truth, they established a foundation dedicated to reuniting families separated by illegal adoptions. The foundation became their shared passion, a way to turn their personal pain into a force for good. They worked tirelessly, using their skills and resources to help others uncover their own hidden histories. As the years passed, their foundation grew, becoming a beacon of hope for those searching for lost family members. Carlos and Eduardo watched with pride as reunions similar to their own played out, each one a testament to the power of truth and the enduring bonds of family. On a warm spring day, 55 years after their separation and 5 years after their reunion, Carlos and Eduardo found themselves back in the park where their extraordinary journey had begun. This time, they weren't alone. Surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and the extended family they had built through their foundation, they sat on the same bench where fate had brought them together. As they watched the newer generations play and laugh, creating new memories in the shadow of the old fountain, Eduardo turned to his brother. "You know, Carlos," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "despite everything, I can't help but think there's something magical about all of this. 50 years apart, and yet, here we are." Carlos nodded, reaching out to squeeze his brother's hand. "It's true," he replied, his eyes twinkling with a mixture of joy and wonder. "Perhaps the most surreal thing isn't what we discovered about our past, but the future we've been able to build together." As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the park, the brothers sat in comfortable silence, marveling at the twists and turns of life that had brought them to this moment. Their story, once a tale of separation and loss, had transformed into one of hope, resilience, and the unbreakable bonds of family. In the laughter of their grandchildren and the grateful smiles of the families they had helped reunite, Carlos and Eduardo saw the legacy of their journey, a testament to the enduring power of love and the unexpected ways in which life can come full circle.